Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Let's Meet webinar by Eurogas, one of our series of webinars that we've been holding over the last few years. And today we are looking at whether or not Europe is ready for the winter challenges. Indeed, we are set to face. And of course, we will be reviewing the Winter Preparedness Package. But of course, I'm sure we'll have one eye on the most recent intervention, the Council regulation that's currently being discussed and will come to fruition possibly as early as next week. So I'm very happy to say that I have an array of different views, different voices, but all experts in their field. And we'll be handing over shortly to Monika Zsigri, the head of unit for the Energy Platform Task Force in DG ENER, one of the more recently developed departments and divisions within DG ENER, basically set up to reflect the challenging times that we are in the energy sector. After the keynote speech, we will be very happy to welcome Anouk Honoré, who is a senior research fellow and deputy director of the gas research program in the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. So a very free thinking and indeed expertise upon our topics will not be in short supply. We also have Jochen Wagner, the chair of the working party for gas at IFIEC. IFIEC being the representation of the large industrial energy users in Europe. And indeed, he's also the team lead contracting and regulatory affairs for natural gas in BASF, I'm sure you're all familiar with. And last but by no means least, we will have Giuseppina, Giusy, as we like to call her, Squicciarini, who's the general manager for regulatory affairs in Europe and Africa from Shell Energy Europe. And so we'll be very keen to hear her views because she's also the chair of Eurogas's Wholesale Market Committee. Now, let's just say very briefly at the beginning of this, we are in indeed a war situation. Europe is in a war, first major land war since the end of the Second World War. And of course, that has had a huge effect on the energy sector, notably relating to supply, but also towards prices. And these are the tasks of the European Commission to try and wrestle with these things, presenting packages of emergency measures, which are usually time-bound, try and deal with difficulties and challenges we find ourselves in. I can honestly say it's an unprecedented period of regulatory activity in the energy sector as far as I'm concerned. I can never recall so many different initiatives being launched in a year to deal with such a crisis, whilst also at the same time having two major legislative packages, the Fit for 55 and the gas and hydrogen decarbonisation packages also running along. So this really is an unprecedented time. We've also seen initiatives around joint purchasing mechanism. There's long discussions about price capping, taxation. We've seen storage, and of course, topping everything, energy efficiency measures. The one thing I would like to say to you as the audience that is very important is that whilst we go through this, you are very free to ask questions. There are so many issues that are up, and I'm sure that you have lots of good questions. Please put your questions into the Q&A function, and I will be sure to pick them out. And so when our experts have finished speaking, I will also try to pose some of the questions that you write to them. I think without further ado, I've already spent 3 minutes, and I don't want to waste too much of our hour. I would like to invite Monika, please, to take the floor. As I said, Monika is the head of unit, the newly created Energy Platform Task Force unit in DG ENER. I'm sure, Monika, you have a lot of views on how the Winter Preparedness Package is going, how it's being implemented. But also we'd be very keen to hear any other views you have on the current and most latest developments in the legislative front. Monika, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours for a good 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and have the opportunity to say a few words. As James was mentioning, there is an extreme activity of regulatory measures coming out at the EU level as a response to the situation in which we are in. So Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine and its weaponization of energy supplies has exposed our dependency on Russian fuels, fossil fuels in general, and it tested our tools to ensure security of supply and driven energy prices to unprecedented levels. Today, more than ever, a strong energy union is a prerequisite for solidarity, prosperity, and the need to keep our homes warm and businesses running. So the Commission has taken several short-term actions since the crisis started. And thanks to that, today the EU and its member states are in a better position than at the beginning of the year. So what were the first actions? The gas storage regulation, James already made a reference to it, demand reduction targets, an EU alert, and the establishment also of the energy platform as the first of the few actions that were taken. Then on 14th of September, a next package of measures was proposed by the Commission. These measures are mobilizing consumers to save energy, significantly dampen the impact of high gas prices and on electricity prices, while at the same time preserving the benefits of the internal market as requested by the EU energy ministers. First, so on electricity prices, we need to reduce our consumption and in a smart way, and we are proposing to do that in two elements. First of all, focusing on the hours of peak electricity demand, and on the other hand, focusing and reducing our overall consumption of electricity. We expect that these coordinated efforts will lead to less gas being used for power generation, lower wholesale electricity prices, and subsequently lower prices for consumers. Second, we are looking at an instrument to break the direct link between high gas prices and electricity prices, and this is why we are proposing to cap the revenues for these inframarginal technologies. But we have to be sure, or we have to ensure that these measures are set in a way that we still ensure adequate investment incentives on the market. And then the difference between the electricity prices and the revenue cap would generate extra financial revenues for member states that can be then used to support consumers in need, both households and businesses, and help the energy transformation. Let me then a bit talk about the energy platform. So as the winter approaches, there is a growing risk, and we have seen already signs of it, of Russia increasing its disruptions and continue the weaponization of the energy supplies. This is why we have strengthened further the preparations for the coming winter and have been working hard to do that. REPowerEU plan is one of the basic major tools, the storage regulation and the demand reduction regulation that I already mentioned. So firstly, on the REPowerEU, it has set the objective of becoming totally independent from Russian fossil fuels through diversification of supply, development of renewables, and energy efficiency. So when it comes to a diversification away from Russian supplies, this is where the energy platform comes into play. As James mentioned, it was established formally on the 1st of June. It is a directorate within DG Energy, and I'm a proud member of it, trying to see what kind of steps we can take and what initiatives to take in order to help achieve these objectives. So the energy platform has been set up together with the member states and is the cornerstone of our strategy to diversify away from Russian fossil fuels and to improve security of supply ahead of next winter, but also beyond. The objectives of the platform are articulated around, first, the aggregation of gas demand for joint purchase, second, the optimization of gas infrastructure in the EU, and finally, a coordinated outreach to our international partners. While the focus of today is on natural gas, the same objectives shall prevail for the supply of hydrogen in the future. Indeed, we must ensure that the work that we do today for natural gas can also be replicated for green hydrogen to support our decarbonization objectives as defined in the EU Green Deal. It is our strong belief that establishing long-term cooperation and partnership with our trade partners is essential to support the delivery of gas and later hydrogen to the EU. And to this end, we have already engaged significant efforts in the context of the EU-US Energy Security Task Force. We have also signed a trilateral agreement between Israel, Egypt, and the EU on cooperation related to trade, transport, and export of natural gas to the EU. There was also an MOU signed by President von der Leyen and Commissioner Simpson with Azerbaijan in July, and we are working on more of these cooperation agreements. The aggregation of gas demand and the assessment of the associated opportunity of joint purchasing are central elements of the platform's mission. It is definitely not the easiest of its objectives. In that respect, there are several models that we have identified already, and we discussed that with member states actually last Friday. Options range from joint tendering by companies to the creation of by companies of joint ventures responsible for the purchase of gas, or the identification of a purchasing agent that can aggregate demand and negotiate on behalf of those companies long-term contracts. We will also propose the organization of pilots in order to test the appetite and the value added of these mechanisms. We are willing now to concretize these initial ideas and tailor them to the actual need of the market players, but also in full consideration of the regional market dynamics. And to this end, the models will be further discussed also in the context of the platform in regional groups, but also in the industry advisory group that we are setting up at the moment. Now, this informal expert group shall provide the Commission with the necessary industrial perspective to meet the objectives of the platform and address current energy challenges. And this is an indirect a call for applications to the membership of the industry advisory group has been published on a dedicated Commission website, and this will be open until 5th of October. And here we are inviting companies, and it's a great opportunity to market a bit this to you. We are inviting companies to this advisory group that are willing to contribute and participate in joint purchasing and have meaningful experience in buying, importing, or selling natural gas in the EU, the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And we encourage you to submit your applications before the deadline. And finally, when it comes to the optimization of infrastructure and supply at regional level, these regional groups are a promising forum to work together on defining and implementing measures in the immediate and short term to support the diversification and security of supply at regional level. We have established 5 of these regional groups, Southeast, which was the first one to be established and was triggered by Bulgaria, Central Eastern Europe, Southwest, Northwest Europe, as well as the Baltics with Finland. Among them, so these groups are responsible to implement short-term measures, and we put these measures in actionable action plans. Among them, the significant efforts have been already done in the Southeast group, where an action plan has already been endorsed and is being implemented. Coming back to the storage regulation and the demand reduction, just to see where we are at the moment. So the storage regulation aimed at reaching 80% of storage filling across the EU by 1st of November. The latest numbers show that we are actually already at 86%. 85% was a political wish in the regulation, but we already surpassed that. And most of the member states, or at least around 12, 13 member states have already passed the 80% filling rate. With these prior measures, the European energy system has been resilient and has been able to replace Russian gas while still continuing to supply member states. But as the heating season approaches, we still need to also look at the demand reduction. If extra supplies are difficult to obtain due to the global situation when it comes to gas supply, we have to look at demand. So what happens with the demand reduction plan and regulation that was adopted back in July? It sets a target of 15% of demand reduction at least, and it also introduces this new tool of a union alert, which can be triggered by the Council after a proposal from the Commission. So the regulation flows in 2-stage approaches. First is a preemptive action that is voluntary, and the second one is the union alert. So first, the member states are called to reduce their demand voluntarily by 15%, and if the reduction is not enough, then a union alert would trigger a mandatory obligation of the member states to meet this 15% of reduction. Now, to declare such an alert, there's the need for the Commission to assess the situation by taking consideration various elements such as the storage filling level, alternative flows of gas and sufficient gas reduction measures, as well as the weather, if we are to be honest. Now, the implementation of the gas demand reduction continues through various exchanges with member states and stakeholders in the gas coordination group. The Commission has also set up a dashboard to monitor the measures adopted by member states and assess the gas savings already achieved. So far, demand reduction efforts, as outlined by the member states, include awareness raising campaigns, heating and cooling reductions, etc. And then most of the member states have already reported that they have reached the 15% target. In any case, the situation needs to be monitored continuously, and it will depend on how the supply situation changes, is whether an EU alert will have to be triggered or not. So all in all, the situation for this winter is manageable, but it can always become more difficult, so we cannot be really complacent. More remains to be done to increase our resilience further and accelerate our energy independence and engage more in EU cooperation and solidarity. So to this end, the Commission will propose additional actions and measures at the end of September. These, I know that the gas price discussion keeps everybody on its toes. It will have to be seen to what extent we will propose anything in that area. In the State of the Union speech, President Ursula von der Leyen has mentioned that there needs to be an assessment of all the tools or all the type of measures that can impact gas prices, that this assessment needs to be done, and this assessment is actually being done currently just to measure or to assess the impact of such measures on the internal energy market, because what we have to be very conscious about is that we need to keep the value and the strength of the internal energy market in dealing with such situations, and the interference in its functioning needs to be minimal and in any case temporary. So that assessment is still ongoing. There are no yet final decisions on what exactly will be proposed, but this is just to anticipate a bit the discussions or the thinking on it. So with this, I would like to thank for your attention. Then I wish you a successful event and rich discussions in the coming minutes.
Thank you very much, Monika. Indeed, you've covered an awful lot in a very short period of time. Really, in just over 10 minutes, we've covered the whole of what's been going on. It won't surprise you to know that a few questions have come in from the audience, and I think perhaps one of them particularly is probably worth mentioning. You also talked about the joint purchasing mechanism, a little bit of detail on there, and discussing what you discussed last Friday, and I think there is a genuine interest around that. Unfortunately, it's come from an anonymous attendee. Nevertheless, the question is quite interesting. And it's a question about the role of the task force, because it's saying that ultimately energy contracts are signed by commercial companies. And are there already negotiations going with commercial companies in order to see how the structure of this process of pooling demand between the task force and private companies? So maybe give a little bit more insight to how you actually see the relationship between private companies and the task force. I think that would probably be useful for us all.
Yes, thank you. Well, we are calling task force everything these days. So there is an issue, then we establish a task force. So the task force as a cooperation between member states and the Commission, it has mainly a facilitating role. So when it comes to joint purchasing and demand aggregation, we propose mechanisms, we discuss it with member states, and companies see which of those are of interest, whether those are implementable in any of the regions. Then we facilitate their implementation. But after all, any negotiations or the activities of between companies remain there with the company. So we, in ourselves, the platform will not interfere or will not be party to very strict negotiations. When it comes to international outreach and with the major supplier countries, that includes Norway, Azerbaijan, or other countries. We smooth the ground on the governmental level just to discuss the opportunity or whether there is openness on both sides, and just to see and understand whether there are extra volumes that could be sent towards the EU. But again, the negotiations are left for the companies.
No, that's helpful, Monika, and I know that is a question that a lot of people do wrestle with, because they're trying to understand it. Is the European Commission going to start buying gas? And I think the answer is categorically no. So yeah, thanks for that. I've also got a question from, and I'm picking these ones as well because they came into my own mind, and this is from Kees van der Looyen. I think is quite familiar to us all. He used to be at Ecofis and now running his own consultancy. He's asking about the split of the achieved savings on gas consumption. My question would be a bit more general in the sense that, do we know how much gas demand reduction there has been since the implementation of the package? But his question is more asking, do you know whether this is a fuel switch or whether there's demand destruction? And we have IFIEC coming on later on to talk about potentially the dangers of factories being switched off. And also then just the general reduction of waste and improvement of energy. Do you have any initial feedback on how the 15% is being implemented? And is there a specific time that member states will feed back to you, Monika?
Well, you would have to look at the dashboard to see whether there is any specifics. But what we have seen from the beginning of the crisis, and there was a lot of, well, there is partly fuel switch in power plants. There is also industrial users deciding to simply rather import the final product rather than produce it within. So there is also that element to it. So it depends also on the country. In some countries, we heard that some of the industrial installations have been closed down, and in some there is postponement of production in terms of timing. So this is how most of the demand reduction has been done, but it depends on the countries, and it is worth looking into the details on that.
And that's helpful. I know that is a big question, because I know we are also in Eurogas keen to understand how that is going, how it's being implemented. I suppose is the way to look at it. I'm going to ask you one more question, if I might, Monika, and then we'll move on to the other panelists. And it's a more broad question from Francois Barthélemy, and he's just asking, has the gas demand reduction forecasted by REPowerEU, this is a sort of 60% reduction from the 2020 levels, has it been by 2030, sorry, has it been raised by any international counterparts? And I presume he's probably thinking about the Americans, but maybe also the Qataris or other suppliers, as an issue when you consider engaging new investments or long-term contracts. And I think that is in relation to the joint purchasing task force that you also have. Has anybody raised this issue with you? Is it an issue that you see? Is there a development in the way the Commission is thinking around these targets that were put out in the staff, the staff paper, sort of non-paper, if you will, but sort of working document? Has anybody raised those things with you, Monika?
Well, of course, supplier countries and supplier companies, what they are looking for is a certainty of demand. And with their long-term plans of decarbonizing, this is something which that they usually inquire about. So how can we now, with the new situation, how can we balance requiring more gas volumes to be produced, and at the same time not being able to provide certainty of demand. So, but this is also why we are looking at demand aggregation, for example, which could actually put together different timeframes, different volumes, and put them into a bigger package that could provide potentially more certainty of demand. We are also looking at the combination of natural gas and hydrogen and see whether such arrangement or long-term certainty of demand of some fuel source could be actually put into question. But definitely this is a question that is brought about and is one of the central questions, apart from price, of course, but this is one of the central questions on how can Europe provide this certainty of demand so that the investments are taking place elsewhere.
I like that statement at the end there, Monika. You talked about the certainty of demand, because I think that is very important, especially when we're dealing with our suppliers. There are so many questions for you, Monika, but I think in fairness, you've answered three, at least, and given us a very good overview. I hope you'll be able to stay with us a bit longer, but I would like to bring in the panel to come in and also maybe to comment on the elements that you've brought up. Thanks again for spending your morning with us. I know how busy you are, and if you need to drop off, please feel free to do so. And thanks again for joining us. Anouk, I wonder if you are online. There we are, Anouk. Wonderful to have you with us. And indeed, we're always very interested in the views of the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. And as a senior research fellow and deputy director for the gas research programme, how are you seeing the activities that are currently being proposed by the Commission? Are we going to be able to handle this crisis with what is being proposed? Welcome, and the floor is yours for a good 4 or 5 minutes, Anouk.
Thank you very much, James. Good morning, everyone. Right, let's look at the key issues for this winter that probably should give us some initial answers to your question. Well, of course, the Russian supply is still the main uncertainty for this winter. On the plus side, we do expect Norway to ramp up its supply from October onwards. We also see some strong LNG, especially with reports expecting to restart around mid-November. Monika already mentioned storages are high, so that's a good sign, at least for this winter, though the storages have been filled up with the help of Russian gas, so there's still a question mark for next winter, of course, regarding the filling up of our storages. Now, for me, the key question is whether what is going to happen on demand. Are we going to be able to reduce demand sufficiently so the supply and demand balance for this winter and next is actually manageable or relatively manageable? The demand this year is already about down by about 30 BCM, so 10-11% down compared to last year. And the region, so the EU, is on track for a decline of about 40 to 50 BCM this year, just on the back of high prices, consumer behavior change, and milder temperatures that we got at the beginning of the year. So having said that, this is probably not going to be enough for this winter. We do count on the industrial sector to do additional effort. But having said that, there's already been some switching. Monika mentioned it. We've seen a lot of switching at the beginning of the year. Lower production is already starting to be seen in various sectors. We do hope that the smaller consumers are going to continue to show some demand response regarding their heating temperature inside their houses. We've already seen some demand response. This has been helped by mild temperatures. So whether this is going to continue if we get colder temperatures this winter is a question mark, and that could potentially be a major issue this winter. The electricity sector, which is usually the most flexible sector in terms of gas demand in the short term, is potentially a source of inflexibility this winter. By that I mean the demand for electricity has stayed high, relatively high this year, and we've had very low nuclear and very low hydro as well, which means that we have had to use gas at a very high level to produce electricity this year. How it's going to change this winter is a major question mark. So all in all, reducing demand this winter will be a necessity, but the practicalities of it is much less certain. So what are the expectations? Can we see a silver lining? Can we see prices and the situation not being so tense this winter? Well, if all the planet aligns, there could potentially be a relatively okay winter if the temperatures are mild, if the LNG is strong, if the demand is low. So we continue to see some demand side response, and potentially we see an economic slowdown with hopefully not too much of an impact on the economic and the industrial sector as well. And if the French nuclear sector improves, as it's supposed to be doing later this year, but again, there's a question mark regarding that. All the risks are, of course, on the negative side, and on all those things on the planet not aligning as we were expecting. And therefore, this is why we will continue to have to monitor what we do with demand. And the discussion on the price cap and new benchmarks is logically going to continue over the next few weeks and months. I think I'm overdone with my 5 minutes, so maybe we will carry on the discussion for later.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, and keeping good time, indeed, Anouk. I wonder actually if I might just put a question to you, which has come in earlier on from Peter Viz, and it's basically it is a lot of the things you were saying is it depends a lot. There's a lot of ifs, and so this is an if. If Russia cuts off the gas supplies entirely, would the gas reserves as they currently are at around 85% see us through the winter? Now you say it depends on whether it's mild or whether we still are able to keep demand relatively low and LNG supplies, and this requires also the French nuclear sector to be up and running. But of course we know that because we had a drought, our hydro sector is relatively low. In winter we also get less solar energy. Is there a reason for optimism that we can actually get through this, or is it really just depending on how cold it gets?
It's really depending on how cold it gets, and it's really depending if those 20 French reactors that are scheduled to come back until the end of November actually do come back. I mean, the cold storage levels are relatively high, even with the ban on Russian coal exports to the EU. So that if we get wind, if the nuclear is back, if the temperatures are mild, we could have again an alignment of the planets, but that's a lot of if that really needs to happen for this. Don't get me wrong. We could see relatively okay winter. I don't mean that prices are going to come back to pre-war level. It's still going to remain really high and really tense, but not as bad as it could potentially go if we get very cold temperatures and continued stress on the nuclear side.
So it is essentially a question of whether or not we have a cold winter to see what...
It could push 20 to 30 BCM of additional gas demand. So yes, absolutely. And that's why I mentioned the customers turning down their thermostat, and everybody is mentioning that. We really have to cross our fingers and hope for that to happen. Because yes, it could change the situation dramatically.
There's one other thing before I move into bringing Jochen, just to, well, actually, Rainer Lutkehuus had asked this of Monika, I believe, saying, when will the Commission propose a price cap for all gas imports, including LNG? I don't know if the OIES has looked at price caps in wholesale markets, whether you have any specific views on that, Anouk.
We do. That's the one thing we've been talking about for the past days and weeks between colleagues. There's not one day that passes without several emails between each other.
I can appreciate that.
We have, and I propose that we carry on the discussion later on, but it's really on the definition of what we mean by pricing caps. If it's wholesale prices, or if we're talking about not passing through the high gas prices towards the consumers, which is most likely what would be the easiest way to do. On hub prices, it's you don't regulate the level of prices. You regulate how the hubs function, but you don't regulate the price. So what we mean by regulating or capping the price, it's probably what is passing through towards the consumers, the end users. And that is actually already being done in several markets. But let's keep that discussion, because there's also a discussion around benchmarks that could be changed. So let's keep that for later, because there's a lot to be said.
Now, thanks for your initial review on that. I just wanted to run that by you. Thank you very much, Anouk. Jochen, I'd be very happy to welcome you to the floor. Jochen Wagner, who is the chair of the Working Party of Gas for IFIEC Europe, as I say, the representative of the energy intensive industries, and indeed is team lead contracting and regulatory affairs for natural gas at BASF. Jochen, we're very happy to have you with us today. Indeed, you are a very important player within this, because you are indeed probably the focus of many of the things like demand reduction. How are you seeing the developments that have gone in the market so far? And are we doing enough to help your sectors? Jochen, the floor is yours. Good 4 or 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, James. We're very happy to be here in this panel. So for European industry, 2022 has been a continuous challenge, not only due to the war in the Ukraine, but especially with regards to the development of the energy prices, as well as the long-term availability of gas. So the recent developments regarding storage levels that we have seen, very happy. So normally we would be able to look relatively relaxed to a safe winter, but the high gas prices that we are seeing in Europe and the increasing global competition as supply chain constraints have diminished are leading to demand destruction in our industries with plant curtailments or even full shutdowns. On top of that, what we are facing, we see also that more and more suppliers are either not willing to offer any new gas supply contracts to large industrial consumers, or they are pricing them at very high levels to mitigate their own risks. On top of that, we see also that some countries, like for example, Germany, are putting additional burden on the industry by introducing new levies to save gas suppliers, instead of using, for example, other measures like direct state aid for these companies. Regarding the discussion about demand reduction, the request now for the winter period to save 15%, we have to say that industry was so far the largest contributor. We saved or reduced on average from Jan to August by 20%, and looking only to August, industry was down by 40%. So we see further lowering of industrial demand really as a risk also for the European economy. And it will also be a struggle for the industry to run plants even at such low levels. So what we need is really getting to lower gas prices. And the question is, what are the right measures? We see the discussions about energy price caps, which might be seen as a solution, but we also have to keep in mind that they bear some risks for some European member states, that their security of supply is at risk. So putting, for example, a price cap on Russian gas, that might lead to no Russian supplies to some countries anymore. And these countries might not have any other supply possibility. It could also be that other suppliers are reducing their supplies. And on the other side, depending on where the price cap would be, it could also lead to a demand increase. So we see there also a lot of cons. Also other measures have cons like direct state aid, no discussion about that. And we think it's the challenge now for the European Union to find the right measures with the lowest negative impact also on our economy. Nevertheless, without doing anything, we think that European industry will struggle to stay competitive and be able to further contribute to the wealth of Europe. And we fear in the long term, if we don't solve that whole issue, that we are also on a path of deindustrialization. So that's the risk that we see currently. And we are trying to contribute as much as possible, but we also need some support because the global competition gets stronger and stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jochen. Indeed, that was, yes, well, I would say you have covered the area as we'd expect. It is one area where I would suggest that challenges remain, especially when you are talking already about the reduction in demand that has been undertaken by your sector. 40% is considerable. And the question of whether or not there is a further room for reduction is very, very valid, especially, as you say, of the impact on the economy and dealing with international competition. We saw a paper, of course, that came out from a group of energy-intensive industries that were calling for things like price caps on gas and electricity markets and separating the gas and electricity market, at least I would say temporarily, and calling for state aid. In IFIEC, are you supporting those calls, or do you see a slightly different route to address the problem?
Yeah, James, within IFIEC, let's say that way, as we are covering several industries, I would say there is not one clear direction. For sure, there are industries that might prefer price caps, but some others see it critical. And as I mentioned it, you have to put everything into a perspective. And looking also back into its history, we know that price caps can also have effects in the market that are counter active. So as I said, it could also lead to a demand increase, whereas we now want to reduce the demand in winter. So you have to really think thoroughly about what is the right measure. And price caps I would say we see critical.
Yes, and there's one question I think which come in very specifically for you, and I would therefore put it to you. It's from Alexandra Tudorio Lacavice, and she's asking, how do absolute demand reduction targets impact industry, especially those industrial sites that have already invested in energy efficiency measures, e.g. cogeneration? Maybe you just have a view on that.
Yeah, we did a lot in the past years regarding energy efficiency. Yeah, so I think that's the task of the industry, and we have contributed there very much. But in some cases, looking at industry, we are not only consuming natural gas for heating purposes or power demand, especially in the chemical industry. It's also used as a feedstock, and we have no other alternative there. So at some points we are really getting to a point where we can't even go lower in the end without, let's say, destroying any value chains.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Jochen. A very sobering contribution. We'll bring you back in the panel discussion in another 5-6 minutes or so. I would like to ask Squicciarini, the General Manager and Regulatory Affairs of Europe and Africa for Shell Energy Europe. Squicciarini, good morning, and thanks again for joining us today. And we are indeed very interested to hear your views. We are very much looking at what the Commission have done. We've heard a lot from Monika about the activities that they've undertaken. How in Shell are you viewing it? Are we doing enough? Are we doing the right things? Or do we need to do something different? Let's say you get 4 to 5 minutes, please feel free to utilize them. And then afterwards, I'm sure there'll be a few questions that we'll get from the audience that I'll put to you. And then we'll have the general panel discussion. So please, Squicciarini.
Thank you very much, James, and good morning, everyone. So let me start by saying that it's clear that we live in extraordinary times. You mentioned that, James, at the beginning, and therefore we understand the need for temporary emergency measures to alleviate the energy price crisis and protect households and businesses in Europe. The current crisis, we heard that quite clearly from Anouk, is essentially an energy scarcity crisis, which is posing challenges to consumers. Jochen was very clear on that, to governments and to companies. So we think we will need to keep working together to address these challenges. It is also clear that to address the root causes of the crisis, Europe will need more molecules and more electrons to compensate for the abrupt drop in Russian gas, and at the same time, the drop in electricity supply, particularly nuclear, as Anouk mentioned before. So attracting molecules remains essential, reducing demand and a necessity to rebalance the market. So we welcome the efforts of the Commission and of the Member States in helping the market rebalance. There's a lot that's already been done, and it has been proposed on that. So on the demand side, the Commission proposal to introduce coordinated electricity demand reduction complements the already adopted gas demand reduction measures. This is a further important step to help rebalance the market. Now, clear, coordinated across Europe, consistent across gas and power public emergency plans would be a welcome further step to reduce uncertainty and therefore pressure on prices. On the supply side, Commission, Member States and company efforts in increasing supply stocks have allowed very high filling rates of storage sites across Europe, and this is positive. Still, Anouk was also very clear on that, and we agree with what she said. Efforts to encourage new supply, including faster development of renewables, will need to continue, particularly as none of us knows what kind of winter, or actually winters, we will have. The number of if we heard is quite a long one. So we will still need extra efforts to encourage medium long-term LNG contracts to Europe, not just spot, to increase LNG capacity and send-outs, increase additional alternative pipeline supplies, removing any bottlenecks, preventing gas and power to flow where it is most needed in the internal market. And let me pick on this last point, because this is something that has been touched upon, perhaps not developed so much in the panel so far. After many years of price convergence across gas markets in Europe, we now see also geographical price volatility, as we're using the grid in a very different way, connecting new supply sources to all demand centers. Now, removing these bottlenecks will be important to rebalance markets and reduce pressure on prices also at local level. And for example, the recent consultation from the Create to Increase Capacity from France to Germany goes in the right direction. Finally, let me say a word on price caps because it has been touched upon. Price caps, there seems to be a pill to try to provide relief to the symptoms, but they come with a long list of unintended and undesirable side effects, which risk making the issue worse. So the question that we have been battling with, and James, you are familiar with that because this is the same questions we're asking ourselves in the debates within Eurogas, is how to ensure we do not discourage alternative supplies to Europe at a time in which every molecule counts. And as Anouk also said, if we think about retail price caps, which could be effectively a way to relieve the pressure on consumers, how do we make sure that those price caps still are consistent with the objective to reduce demand and to be more efficient in the use of our demand? Finally, we would encourage government to pursue short-term objectives without undermining long-term objectives, such as achieving the EU's climate and renewable targets. So any global measures on profits from renewable generation should be compatible with the REPowerEU objectives, preserve incentives to invest, and then financial viability of renewable investors, because ultimately the real decouple comes with investing in new renewable sources. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, GC. And indeed, you also in a very short period of time managed to get through a lot of important and contentious issues. And you're right to point out at least one of them is, I have to smile, it's an ongoing discussion amongst the member states and the European Commission. And also, we represent that in a microcosm in a way in Eurogas. I'm sure we will come on to price caps, but just before I pull everyone back in, I also, as you are also involved in extraction, we've got a question from Massimo Lombardini, and saying nobody's talking about increasing EU domestic production. You know, an example in Italy in the 1990s produced 20 billion cubic meters, and now it's down to 2. Should we not be doing this as a sort of short to midterm, I would argue, short to midterm measure? How are you seeing that in Shell? Are you also encouraging governments, policymakers, stakeholders to think about this, that we should be getting back into domestic production or not?
So as I was saying before, we think the priority is really to think about measures which help rebalance the market, and that comes from additional supplies and reduction of demand. So the additional supplies, there could be a variety of things. It's about LNG, it's about pipelines, and it's about potentially, for example, removing some of the constraints on upstream production. And I'm not surprised the question come from an Italian colleague, because there is an active debate there, and it is a very important one.
Yeah. Well, I think it also, I mean, you also see the UK have talked about relaunching licensing. It's becoming a thing. I think it could have been also from a Dutch person as well. I think there's also a discussion going on there, and also about the extension of Groningen. One other quick question, because again, as a global player, you maybe have a good view of this. Agata Loskot-Strakota is asking, are there any discussions with key partners, exporters of gas, so you're saying Norway and US and others, about a sort of grand bargain? Not just focusing on getting the supply, as you say, but also trying to make prices more bearable. It somehow links in a way to sort of joint purchasing in a way. And I'm just interested in the Shell view on this. Do we need to have a grand bargain, as Agata has described it? How do you see this about the improving, in your own words, sort of saying improving supply?
So I think what Monika said at the beginning is very important. I think there is a role for Europe in helping creating the ground for commercial companies to work on additional supplies. So that is something that we can see a role of for the platform there on the relationships. Ultimately, we need to be conscious that we will be operating in a global market where there will be a number of factors. So, for example, at the beginning, in the Anouk's presentation, we focus a lot on the European ifs. There are a number of equivalent ifs across the globe. So it is about how cold the winter will be in Europe. It is also about how much supply our people in Asia or in other parts of the globe will need, and what kind of winter they will have. So again, it's about creating the ground for commercial companies to act, and making sure that we have in Europe the right regulatory framework to still be competitive and attract the molecules that we need.
Thanks very much, GC. And again, always appreciate the insights that you have. I'd like to call all of the panelists back, and I think Monika is still here. So Monika, if you want to also join, feel free. I think that in some way we have to sort of grasp the bull by the horns. We've all sort of flirted with it and skirted around the edges. I'm going to use Stephanie Monta's question as the way to go in. She's asking, what mechanism are you proposing? Well, I think that's probably meant for Monika, but for the panel, let's say, what mechanism are you proposing to cap the pass-through price to end consumers? So in a way, it's saying, how are we going to see the prices that we see on the wholesale market, and how are we going to protect consumers from it? Is this therefore a retail intervention that we need, or do we need those price caps at the wholesale market? And everybody knows that there have been different papers put forward by different governments. It's almost like everybody has their favorite version of what a price cap would look like. What do we need to do? How do you see it? And I think we'll start with Anouk and then go Jochen and then Giuseppina, just as in the order that you spoke. And then we'll probably mix it up for the next question. We've still got 10 minutes. So, you know, again, if you want to spend 2 minutes each answering this, this is fine, because I think it is the main meat of today's discussion. So please, Anouk.
Thank you very much. So let me just repeat what I've been saying. TTF and the other hubs around Europe are largely unregulated markets. The only regulated element or bits of it are the exchanges. What is not regulated is the price itself. So when we're talking about putting a cap on wholesale prices, and in other words, what the industrials, what the power generators will be paying, for me, this is not putting a price on wholesale prices. This is putting a cap on end user prices, if you want. So this is slightly different from the discussion that have been focusing on trying to reduce or focus on putting a cap on the price of Russian gas, for instance, which is, for me, a very completely different discussion. So the way to do it, for me, would be to actually put a cap on what is being passed through towards the end users. In other words, the problem with the TTF is really how you just put a cushion towards the impact it has on its customers. We've seen it being done in Spain for the power generators, where there's been a cap on how much they're paying for the price of gas. I think this is compensated at the generators level, so not the gas suppliers, but the power generators are then being compensated by the government for any gas that they would pay above, I think it's 40 euros. So that's one way of doing it. But of course, there's plenty of cap with the household sector, the retail, the small end users that have been protected, shielded from the increase in gas prices. At the industrial, we're also starting to see that in many more discussions around the member states. And I would be very interested to hear Jochen views around these discussions, because there's various options that have been talked about at the member states level.
Yeah, I think this is right, and I think I would like to go to Jochen now as well, because in fact, it's true. There's the Iberian Peninsula. There are price caps. The UK is talking about price caps specifically for industries on both electricity and gas. The question always to me, though, goes into what you said, Jochen. If you are cushioning, to use Anouk's word, how do you make sure that the demand reduction that you need is also taking effect? So you get I throw the hottest potato to you, Jochen. How are we going to solve that problem?
Taking away my answer, James. In the end, I think the issue is that we had a market that was functioning very well, but what happened is that a large player just took out his volumes, which is something I think no market would be prepared for such a thing. And from our perspective, the best to get the prices down is to have again somehow these supply volumes. I don't say that they should come from Russia, but somehow we need that volume. Then the market itself will bring down the prices again. But that is more a long-term perspective, as we know that, let's say, before that whole thing started, you saw already that the, let's say, global gas market was more or less balanced, at least by after the COVID crisis, when the Asian demand was coming back, we were already running into a more balanced global gas market. I think Giuseppina will see this similar. And so, okay, where should the volumes come from? And they can't come very fast. We know this. So that will not be a short-term solution. But yeah, looking at the price caps, which were mentioned, for example, for Spain, if you look what happened in Spain is that you see that there was much more gas demand for power generation in Spain. So it's, as I mentioned, that can also be counteractive measure in the end. And you have to really think about that one, if putting just the price cap there is really the right thing. It could trigger additional demand. And on the other side, okay, you have to finance that somehow. And I think, yeah, also for the member states, the pockets are not always infinite. And so that is, I think, the challenge here, really, to find the right measure. And honestly speaking, we also have no answer, except having somewhere a lot of gas available on short notice.
It is indeed a question about supply and demand, isn't it, and the balancing thereof. But thank you, Jochen, indeed, for wrestling that.
Can I ask Jochen?
Oh yes.
Are you expecting any curtailment this winter for the large industrials? Well, how do you see this risk?
As I said, we are already down, and if you look to some publications from ICIS, etc., especially, I'm coming from the chemical industry, so I know that one very well. If you're looking how the chemical and fertilizer industry looks like in Europe, then you see that a lot of plants are down, a lot of productions are down. We have to say, okay, what else do you want to curtail here on our side? There is not very much left. And also some industries need at least a certain minimum of gas, because otherwise they will suffer really heavy technical damages as well, looking to the glass industry, but also in the chemical industry. And the thing is also, for example, in the chemical industry, that some base chemicals are required for a lot of, let's say, also important industries like food industry, like pharmaceuticals, etc. So I think it might happen. I think it really depends on, as you said, how will the winter develop? What will happen with the LNG supply, the Norwegian supply? It's a very fragile construction that we have at the moment. If anything gets out of the balance, we will face some issues. And then it's the challenge for the member states to look, okay, where are we curtailing industry?
Thank you, Jochen, and thanks, Anouk. I do like to have little interventions like that. Giuseppina, we are getting to you. And in fact, I would just to expand the discussion, because in your intervention, you mentioned unintended consequences, which I think has prompted Marcel Steinbach to write, the price caps are all financed by taxes, bonds in brackets. What do you see as the main unintended consequences? So you could give a little overview about the price cap, but also then you can focus on what you mean by the unintended consequences. I think Marcel, and the others would be happy to hear your views on that.
So I think it's an important distinction to make between wholesale and retail. And I think we've been very clear so far in the discussion about the unintended consequences for wholesale. Ultimately, we need the molecules and we need the electrons. So how do we make sure a price cap at wholesale level is not discouraging additional supplies? And by that, on the question from Anouk about what kind of price cap, any price cap at a wholesale level, or, for example, contribution on import, additional cost to import, would have a discouraging effect on alternative supplies to come to Europe. So that is the main side effect. Then we touched upon the Iberian price cap. And there, again, there is a very clear unintended side effect, which could, maybe it's bearable in Iberia, it would really be difficult to deal with in Central European markets. And that is the unintended consequence of increasing gas demand. Then when it comes to retail, the list of side effects is still there. Perhaps it's a bit less long, but there are two important ones. One is, how do we make sure that there is still demand reduction, and Anouk insisted a couple of times about making sure that that is really delivered. And on the other side, how do we make sure consumers in Europe will still have a financially viable supplier if the mechanism is such that not all the wholesale costs are passed down to consumers? So how do we make sure we really deal with the potential side effects?
This is the real question, isn't it? And I think that's the big one. And I think Jochen, Anouk, and yourself have all touched on that today, and Monika even in her keynote speech. We have literally run out of time, but I would like to ask one last question for all of you to wrap it up. It's from Milan Urban, the last voice, if you will. And Milan is, I should also be clear, is one of our board members from Slovakia, obviously facing his own issues as well there. Who should deliver the volume on the market? Is it the role and responsibility of and he means in this crisis, I'm sure. Is it the role and responsibility of the European Union, the member states, or the gas companies? You can pick one of three, as you like, Anouk. Over to you first, then Anouk, Jochen, and if you'd like to say any final words as well, this is the right moment to make any final points. So please, we'll go back in order. Anouk, Jochen, Giuseppina, and then I believe we will wrap up. Thank you.
Look, I think the easy answer is all of the above. We are on the brink of a very difficult winter. We're on the brink of potential major recession. The situation is tense. I talked about all the planet being aligned, and then there's potentially a softer situation this winter, but all the planet really needs to be aligned. Therefore, I think it's a role of everybody, even down to the end user customers that we talked about, to really do something to ease up the winter. Exactly who should deliver the volumes? Well, there's various options. We talked about caps. There's the Commission talks about benchmarks to ease the prices. There's discussions around negotiating directly with the suppliers. James, we talked about that earlier on when we had a discussion, you and I. Discussing with Norway, discussing with the US, Qatar, Algeria, see if they would be willing to help us for this winter. There's a lot of things that needs to be happening. Exactly picking one solution is not going to make it work. We just need to look at all various options to work together to make through this winter and next winter potentially. This is not just a 3 months problem. This is potentially a 2-year problem. Very difficult situation.
Some of the questions we've had have also suggested that maybe they're not as worried about this year as they are about what's coming in the future. Still, personally, I think that we shouldn't consider this one as a done deal yet. But anyway, yes, Jochen, please. And thanks, Anouk. Thanks very much for your interventions today. Jochen.
Yeah, okay. Regarding who should deliver these additional volumes, as I said, I think the global market is relatively balanced, so there's not very much that we can bring in, let's say, on spare volumes. Yeah, and it's normally the market, yeah, that solves that issue by the market prices that is diverting the LNG either to Asia or to Europe. Yeah. So in the short term, I think it's in the end the market. Yeah, I'm not sure if other instruments really help there, or if we even can establish them in such a short time. In the longer term perspective, I think it's really the industry and the member states that have to work together. Yeah, I think it's very good that the member states or the European Commission are talking to the large suppliers like Norway, the US, and so on. But in the end, there must be somehow a contract, and that will be done between some gas companies, some suppliers, and some buyers in the end. But I think it might help, especially the ones that are developing now new gas projects, that there is a certain backing at the buyer side, and there the member states might be a good backup. Yeah.
Thank you, Jochen. And again, thanks very much for your interventions today. It's been a great pleasure to have you with us. Giusy, the final words.
Very quickly, the answer is really there is a role for everyone to play here. So there is a role for the Commission and regulators and governments to create the right regulatory framework. I mentioned before, we see the priorities is measures which help rebalance the market. There is a role for commercial players, to keep delivering supplies and to put in delivering of supplies to consumers as a priority. And I believe we have been playing our part, and we will keep doing that. There is a role for consumers in terms of responding to the energy efficiency incentive and awareness of what the situation is and the need to really be very efficient in energy consumption this winter and beyond.
Yeah, indeed, GC, and I think that's a fair note to finish on, because indeed we've known for the last few years that the mantra of Brussels that energy efficiency is first, and therefore demand reduction being one of mechanisms for energy efficiency, that certainly is a direction we have to go in. I think we will always take the views of Jochen, though, that when energy efficiency or demand reduction has gone so far, it's very difficult to go these extra miles, and the return becomes very, very difficult. What I would like to say is to thank very much the panelists for their great insights. This is a very difficult and complex situation. These are emergency measures that we're talking about. Many of them, of course, are time limited. And we will have to see what the European Commission proposes in a more, should we say, more surgical way to look at the electricity market. And we know that many of the issues we talk about are emergency and therefore time limited, but other bigger issues are coming up. I do believe we will have a challenge year, and in Eurogas we will remain open and very happy to discuss with all stakeholders as the winter progresses. We will probably hold another one of these meetings in December, where we can really take into account a better view of how the winter is panning out and the measures that have been taken. It certainly is my view that we will all need to cooperate and collaborate, as we've never done before, across sectors and industries, and only pulling together, I think, will get us through this. And I will also take the point of Anouk's that we are somehow also hostages to the weather. We all know that, and the weather is perhaps going to be critical this year. So if you have any powers left, please, let's all pray for some sort of mildish normal weather. Thanks to Monika again for the good insights, and also for the keynote and answering the questions so well. Of course, as I said, thanks to the panelists already. Thanks to you as the participants for coming, and also for asking so many questions. I can only go through so many. We're limited in the time. We're already 6 minutes over. The questions that we can answer, Eurogas will answer, and we'll put it on LinkedIn as usual. We'll alert you all to that post when it's there. So we try to answer as many questions as possible. And as I said, we are very much still open for discussion and dialogue. If you would like to contact us, please feel free to do so. I must thank the team for organizing this, and Kathleen in particular for doing a great deal of work to make sure that this runs as smoothly as possible. I wish you all a good day, and I wish you all the very best for the coming months. Thanks again for joining us this morning, and we will indeed be following up on all of these issues very, very shortly. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.